How important is the actor to you?
That's number one, and everything else underneath.
Not everybody thinks like that, I don't think.
I would be curious to hear what other people's number one is. I mean, not that we're making lists and stuff, but what else do you look at when you look at a movie?
It's a god-awful small affair.
Licorice Pizza is the 9th film from acclaimed director Paul Thomas Anderson. Following on from 2017's Phantom Thread, the movie is another two-hander driven by charismatic performances from its pair of leads, Alana Haim and Cooper Hoffman, both first-time actors. Set in the Los Angeles Valley during 1973, the film follows their burgeoning romance and resulting adventures over the course of 1 year, as they attempt to navigate both the relationship and the bumpy transition from youth to adulthood. Welcome to Drop the Guillotine, the show where guests join me to talk anything and everything, but ultimately nothing. Spencer, before we dive into Licorice Pizza, how would you describe your relationship to the films of Paul Thomas Anderson?
Well, I'm not a hardcore fan. Before anybody comes at me, I haven't actually seen all Paul Thomas Anderson movies, as we were discussing the other day. But I do really appreciate his movies. They're the kinds of movies that you kind of watch, and sometimes you're a bit like, what just happened? Or what did I just watch?
The ones that take a few viewings.
Yeah, you kind of have to view them differently than the ways you view some other movies, because they don't really have like a beginning, middle, or end. They just kind of, it's like slice of life movies. And this one especially, I feel, is like that. But I just find his movies really interesting. They're different from most movies that come out of Hollywood, and I think that the fact that these kinds of movies can still come out and they can still do well and people enjoy them it's good.
That's the thing. Can you think of anyone else who's kind of operating? I mean, Tarantino being the obvious example, but in terms of coming out of Hollywood, who else do you feel is kind of operating on his level?
Yeah,
you kind of have your old guard like Scorsese, who's still managing, but even the people, if you think of Spielberg and a lot of other classic directors, they tend to tail off in the kind of later years, and we're left with few and far between in terms of filmmakers of his caliber operating at this level at this point.
Yeah, or even like the Spielbergs and those kind of guys, they still end up in like huge franchise movies and stuff, and it's not always still like big kind of like big budget art house films kind of.
Are you saying Ready Player One isn't a big budget art house film?
Well, I don't know. It's a matter of interpretation, I think. But I mean, you've got some kind of smaller ones like Robert Eggers.
Yeah.
His name, yeah. And then some smaller filmmakers. But I guess like Wes Anderson's another one.
Similar to Anderson, they kind of find their pocket and kind of carve it out, and they're sort of just off on their own doing their thing, and there's a built-in audience for them.
Yeah, they always kind of acquire like cult followings for their movies. But I definitely think this kind of film is dying out, especially in the age of like the big budget superhero films, which I don't think are inherently bad, but they're just a very different mindset from other films. And I think the fact that just dominates the revenues in the box office so much, it can be a shame for some movies that come out that are maybe a little bit more out there, a bit more creative, but they just don't really get the audience because we have these big budget Marvel movies and stuff that come in and kind of take the spotlight.
That's the thing that's interesting about Licorice Pizza too. I mean, Anderson at large, his movies never tend to do particularly well. Again, like I was saying, they have that audience, and you do see that reflected in the box office. But I think I was looking at Licorice Pizza before this, and it's only done about 15 million or something. But at the same time, it feels like a movie that people are talking about. A lot of people that I kind of come into contact with in my sphere, whether it be at work or other places, it's a film that people have seen and that people are kind of discussing in a way that I can't really think of too much. Maybe the last time again to come back to Tarantino, and I think it's a comparison we'll come back to a few times over the course of this Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, was the last sort of film that was in a similar sense that people were talking about in the sort of cultural sphere. The
screening I went to last night there, it was packed, but it does kind of feel like the release was a bit more low profile than some.
Staggered as well. It seems to be like a slow burn that's continuing.
Yeah, because we went to see it, the first time I saw it was the day it went out on New Year's Day, and there was like hardly anybody there, and the Cineworld near me wasn't showing it, so we went to this little indie cinema that was playing it. It just kind of seemed like a very low profile release. I mean, obviously the big budget films and stuff, they can, like, they're just shoving them down your throat all the time. They're like in your face, whereas these movies kind of come out and sometimes slip under the radar. But like Paul Thomas Anderson does have a very built-in audience that will kind of always go and see his films, which is good. And I hope that that kind of thing continues to allow these sorts of people to make these movies, because I think that this is kind of like what cinema's all about. Like there was did you see The Last Duel that came out a couple months ago?
Yeah, that flopped.
Yeah, totally flopped, but it was really good, and I hadn't really seen a movie that was
It's another
quite
film with
like
an
that.
interesting narrative structure to it.
Yeah, it took a very unique approach, and it wasn't really like anything I'd ever seen before, and nobody saw it, which is just a shame. And I just worry that these kinds of movies just won't really get their place anymore.
So this film, Licorice Pizza, it looks at a romance between two characters. You've got Gary, who's 15, Alana, who's 25, set in the Los Angeles Valley, 1973. And as you were kind of alluding to earlier, in terms of the narrative of it, it almost feels like it could be a series of short films. You have your kind of meet cute where they meet at his school photo day where she's working and he's a student getting his photo taken, and from there they go on a date, and from that point onwards you have things like she accompanies him as a chauffeur to New York for a TV spot that he's doing for a film he was starring in. He's a child actor at the beginning of the film. Sort of the film kind of finds him at the end of that part of his life. He's kind of moving out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there you have things such as he starts a waterbed business, he starts a pinball business, she gets involved with the local mayoral campaign. Each sort of maybe 10-15 minute chunk of the film could be its own thing, essentially. It's set over the course of a year, but they feel like very contained stories kind of strewn together, like you say, to give this impression of a slice of life.
You mentioned earlier a movie that makes me keep thinking about is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's the same kind of thing where it's like stuff happens in the movie, but it's not really conventional plot. It's kind of a slice of life movie, and in the same way, that's kind of a string of short films as well. Like each section of that movie feels like it could kind of stand on its own as a little piece, like it could have been a mini series or something. That's kind of how this feels as well. Like you've got the like the whole sequence with Sean Penn, which just kind of comes out of nowhere, and you're kind of like, what the fuck's going on here?
He pops up for 10-15 minutes.
In a good way. And then the whole stuff with Bradley Cooper. And I think that kind of narrative structure can be a bit jarring for certain people, because they're like, obviously there's these really big actors in these sections, which are just essentially in celebrity cameos, but people be like, oh, well, he's only in this small part of the movie. But I think it works really well for this film, because it's got like a very carefree vibe about it, and I think that this kind of narrative structure like doesn't really care about conventional plot and that kind of thing.
I mean, in terms of those little segments, were there any of them that you would have fancied spending a bit more time in?
Yeah, well, I think all of them, like, you want to spend more time in, but I think that's kind of the appeal, because he kind of gives you just enough that you want to spend more time in it, but not too much that it takes up too much time of the movie and it gets boring. I really like the Sean Penn sequence with him in the bar, and I loved
Tom Waits pops up there too.
Yeah. He's one of my favorite characters in the movie. I just love that, and I love like the whole vibe of that sequence, like the shot of him coming through the smoke in the bar, and then the shot of them all walking like along the grass out to the jump that he goes on to do.
I think too, by casting such high caliber actors in such small roles, it perhaps gives them a certain depth that maybe wasn't on the page. With the kind of nuances of their performance, everyone feels like a very idiosyncratic, and it helps to make the world feel a bit more lived into.
Yeah, well, it's also got like a bit of mystery and ambiguity about it and stuff, because you see them for such a short period of time that you're kind of thinking like, oh, what is this person's deal? What do they do? Like, I want to see more of this person, especially the whole Sean Penn sequence. It kind of came out of nowhere, and you're kind of like it felt so much like just a nice drunken night out. Like one thing was happening after
the
another.
The whole film's kind of a bit like that.
Yeah, true, but that bit especially, you're kind of just like along for the ride. And I mean, initially I was like, what the hell's going on? But I mean, that's kind of the charm about it, because you're just watching these guys, like these very interesting characters interact. And I love that sequence. And then I thought Bradley Cooper was brilliant as well. He was really, really funny. I would have liked to see some more of his character. I know there were some like shots in the trailer and stuff that got cut out of the final film.
I think that comes back to what you're talking about. The power of these sequences on their own is how, not brief perhaps they are, but the kind of impact of them is that they come and they go, and you imagine that the reason that those shots, particular extensions of the sequences have been cut out, is purely for the pacing and to keep it moving.
When you write a scene that doesn't work, you generally spend way too much time trying to do it. You spend too much time reshooting it, rewriting it, trying it 100 different ways, and then you realize like this scene doesn't belong in the film. it's like after this many years, you'd think you'd be able to spot it quicker. Like, and actually on this time, a couple times we did. I had some scenes that I wrote that just were not working. And I would say to Alana and Cooper, I said, well, what if you didn't say any of this dumb dialogue that I wrote and you just walked or silently looked at each other? And it was great. And we'd have this magical thing. And it was a classic example of like, too much with the dialogue, enough with the writing, you know? Get out of it. Stay out of it.
That's one of the things that this film does best is the pacing, like going between each segment. It just kind of chugs along so well that you just don't really realize that 2 hours have passed and the film's almost over. Because I think each segment is so interesting on its own rights that it just keeps moving along and you never really get bored of it, because each segment's like long enough that it allows you to spend enough time in that world with those characters, but short enough that it keeps you interested and it keeps you wanting more, and it keeps you questioning what's going to happen next.
How long did it take you to settle into the film and kind of become comfortable with the pacing of it?
I mean, I was settled in pretty quick. I think Paul Thomas Anderson does a very good job of just kind of like capturing a mood very well, very early on. Like even the beginning, like the interaction between Gary and Alana at the school photo shoot, like it was very interesting and very interesting to watch. And like I was pretty much hooked immediately.
I think again though, partly down, I mean they're both first time actors, something we've not mentioned so far, but the thing about it is that there's a certain unpredictability. I think Alana in particular with her performance, perhaps because she didn't go to acting school and she's kind of making these choices that aren't rooted in a particular logic of that degree, and they're kind of coming from a more natural instinctual place. There's a certain, in the same way with the film too, you don't really know where it's going and you sort of feel like it can twist and turn at any moment. They
both just kind of fit into their roles really well, and were both really charismatic, like in their own ways. Cooper Hoffman was great, I thought.
The thing with that part too is that if you miscast it, it could so easily be an irritating character. You have this kind of, I think he refers to himself at the beginning of the film as a showman, this kind of flashy, I mean he's more of a salesman really, 15-year-old who's kind of quite big for his boots, if you know what I mean. Yeah, well, I heard Paul Thomas Anderson talking in an interview about casting that character, and he said that they went through a bunch of different people around that age to try and find the role, and he said that most of the ones who auditioned were kind of like too cocky in that way, too egocentric, and he said that he was looking for somebody more like who's confident, obviously, but they're still like, he's got heart, he's nice, he's charming. And I heard him say in the interview he went through a bunch of people for the role, and then he just kind of thought, do I know any charming, kind, charismatic 15-year-olds in my life? And he's like, yeah, I know Cooper Hoffman. So
I'm a showman, it's my calling. I don't know how to do anything else. It's what I'm meant to do. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I've been a song and dance fan.
Come on.
Did you feel like this was more of a Gary movie or more of an Alana movie?
I don't know. I feel like it'll be different for different people. I think because, I mean, being a 15-year-old boy and like, I feel like we can kind of relate to Gary a little bit more at times, maybe because like some of the feelings he has at that age in his life, like I feel like we've kind of all had similar kind of things. Like
the thing that's interesting too though is that she is really the one with kind of more going on. Like you say, he's a 15-year-old boy, and as a result of that there is a certain, I don't want to say there's less depth to his character, but there's a little bit less going on. Yeah, I suppose there's some less going on, but he's kind of like the driving force in the movie, I feel. Like Alana's he's the one that's always on the move.
He's the one who's always on the move, and he's kind of the one more so that maybe changes Alana's life than she changes his too, but like I could maybe picture Alana if she had never met Gary in the movie, just kind of cruising, doing odd jobs like the photo assistant and stuff, but when she meets Gary, like she completely changes and her life totally changes. So I feel like Gary's maybe a bit more of the driving force in the movie.
I do feel like she is looking for a way out though at the beginning of the movie already. You have it when she's seeing the Lance character, who's another actor a couple of years older than Gary, I think, maybe a few, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I don't think they really say. I know
it's indicated he's a little bit older.
Yeah.
But at the scene when she brings him back for Shabbat dinner and it kind of all ends in tears and he's left and she comes storming back into the house, And one of the lines I picked up on that I really loved that she says is, he could have been my way out of here, or something along those lines. And it's the same thing when you find her at the mayoral campaign later on in the film. She's looking for a sense of fulfillment. She's looking to be a bigger part of something and sort of escape this family dynamic that she really doesn't fit in. It's also mentioned, that the two sisters in the movie both work for the family. I think it's a law business or something.
I think it was a
along
real
those
estate
lines.
business.
Real estate business. And it's not the path that she wants to cover. She's looking for something different, and she doesn't quite fit with where she is when we find her at the beginning and through most of this film.
Why would you do that? He was maybe going to be my boyfriend.
Listen, young lady, you don't bring this idiot to Shabbat dinner here.
Listen, Dad, he's an atheist and an actor, and he's famous.
But he's Jewish.
He was going to take me out of here.
What do you make of the age difference? It's one of the two, shall we say, controversies that have kind of surrounded the film, or points of discussion that have been particularly heated for people.
It's definitely a talking point. I don't particularly have an issue with it because I don't know. The movie's just so innocent and carefree that you don't really think about it too much. And I think because it's Gary who's initiating it, it's a little bit more easy to accept than if it was the other way around. Obviously, I think that would be a bit more problematic.
I think the other thing as well with the age difference is that there's clearly a reluctance on her part to do with it, and she's very clear from the start in stating that we're not boyfriend and girlfriend, and that you kind of just accept the relationship as a friendship that has a certain kind of almost points of like brotherly, sisterly love to it. They're clearly two characters who very much love each other, and yet they're separated by this kind of age barrier. It's interesting too, though, because if you look back a lot of Paul Thomas Anderson's filmography, he's concerned with these characters who very much can fit in and they can't find love, and they're struggling to search for it, and they're looking for a connection that for some reason they just can't find a way to get to. And in this case, it's the age difference that is kind of the barrier, rather than the two characters themselves who are very compatible with each other.
Yeah, and they don't make a huge deal of it, I feel. And the movie's definitely not just like, oh, it's a love story between Gary and Alana. It's like you say, it's much more of it's like a friendship, like a hangout movie. And you can tell that they are two characters who love each other, like you say, but it's not really like shoved in your face, which I think is why it's maybe not as problematic as it could be.
There's no will they, won't they, you know? No,
there's no will they, won't they. And then even at the end when she's like, I love you, Gary, it could still be seen as like, I mean, they love each other, but it's not necessarily like a boyfriend girlfriend type of love. They just love each other as people, and I think that's. It's the fact that they love each other as people, not as anything in particular, that kind of makes it okay.
Do you really want to see my boobs?
Can I touch them?
The other point of heated discussion with the film has been the restaurant owner, who has two Japanese wives, both of which he speaks to in a mock Japanese accent, speaking English, not speaking Japanese.
I reckon he's had a few more than two as well, by the way he acts.
What did you make of that and the sort of criticisms that have been levelled with the film in regards to racism and showing this character?
Yeah, I mean, I personally thought it was very funny.
You're laughing at him, though.
You're laughing at him, you're not laughing with him. He's very clearly portrayed in a way that you do not condone his actions, which I think makes the difference between being racist and then being funny. I think it's definitely intended for comedic purposes. You're laughing at his
bigoted 70s attitudes and how ridiculous they are with the hindsight.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure like plenty of guys like that existed in the 70s, and I'm sure they still do today, unfortunately. But it's not a case of, oh, we're condoning this guy's actions. It's where, like, look at this idiot. Like, let's laugh at this guy because of how dumb he is. But I thought it was very funny. And both times I went to see it at the cinema, laughed probably the hardest at those moments.
The other thing that's worth highlighting is that it's very much indicated in both of those scenes that the wives are the ones in control and they are the brains behind the operation. He's this sort of blustering fool, the kind of center of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's another reason why it's not an issue really for me. I don't think it should be an issue, because I really don't think it's intended in any of the ways that people seem to think it might be.
Regarding other moments of laughter in the film, we've touched upon it briefly, but we've not really delved into it too much. We've got Bradley Cooper's character, which starts as a moment of laughter and starts as a sort of comedical, farcical thing, and starts to get into a territory where it could go either way.
Do you know who I am?
Yeah.
Do you know who my girlfriend is?
Barbara Streisand?
Barbara Streisand.
Sand.
Sand, yeah, like sands, like the ocean, like
Barbara
beaches.
Streisand?
No, like Streisand.
They deliver the waterbed, they kind of get out of there. It's a little bit hairy. There's something clearly off about this coked up hairdresser who's going out with Barbara Streisand. And then when they're driving away, they come upon him running up the hill. We're in the middle of a gas crisis. His car's out of gas, and he gets into the truck to get gas with them. And the way he is around Alana is quite unsettling, and there's a sort of indication that this could turn sour very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly then when we see it in the hindsight of the gas station sequence that follows, someone who is clearly unhinged, if we were in any doubt prior to this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I thought he was one of the best parts of the movie. I loved his character. I feel like I could watch probably an entire movie of his character in that.
That was the scene you spoke about that you were disappointed was cut out of the trailer, a shot of him with his toe.
Yeah, he's like smashing some car windows. I'm sure there was a lot of footage of him that was cut out, unfortunately, but I'd love to see it at some point. But yeah, he was just so funny and so unpredictable, and I think that's why he was so interesting to watch, because he went from moments of being very, very funny and being like quite nice to Gary to saying he's going to murder his brother in front of him and choke him out. But I just thought that whole performance was hilarious and just completely unhinged. I think unhinged is probably the best way to describe it.
The other thing is, I don't know if you find this, but I felt throughout the film, perhaps because of how innocent and nonchalant it was, that there was a tension that came from that, and I felt like there was something coming, and an incident that was where things were going to turn hairy. And I think part of it comes from that when you put that sequence of real tension in, it really does carry into the kind of final half an hour or however is left of the film past that point.
Yeah, definitely changed the vibe for a minute with that whole movie. That was definitely the most intense part, I feel, especially when they were filling up his mattress and Gary kind of, you can tell like on his face he's thinking about what this guy's just said, and then he said he was going to kill what was his brother called again? Kirk or something. No, not Kirk. I can't remember what his brother was called, but he said he's gonna kill. And then you see like a shot of his little brother just standing like outside the window on his own. He looks kind of helpless and looks kind of like a shot in a horror movie, like somebody's going to come behind him and like stab him or something.
Something out of a Jordan Peele movie.
Yeah. So that bit's got some intensity to it. And then
the scene at the mayoral office as well, when you have the figure who's kind of hanging around outside, who I kind of read that when I first saw it as a terrorist. There was going to be some sort of assassination, there was going to be some sort of terrorist incident, but it's then later revealed to as possibly a journalist or a private investigator of some description trying to find out seedy details about the mayoral candidates.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he was like a stalker or something initially. He was quite menacing.
That's the other thing, is that although there is this innocence to the movie, like we've said, it's set in LA in the 70s, a city that is famed for sort of being, you know, dark after hours, and it's not something, it's these moments that kind of allow that to feel like a more rounded picture of it, and you feel the darkness creeping into the movie from the sort of outer peripheries. Yeah,
and I think it's good that it doesn't creep in too much and kind of overshadow that kind of hopeful, carefree aspect of the movie has going for it. But you can definitely, kind of feel it at certain points, whether it's not even if it's not actually shown on screen, you can definitely kind of feel it creeping in. But I think it's good that the tone of the movie was kept very fun and very carefree the whole time. I thought it was one of the best parts about it.
You know, there's so many actors out there that have never had opportunities to do what they're really capable of. I mean, I'm telling you, the list is like so long. It's not like any other profession where if you're great, you know, you will rise. And
it reminds me of when the Kenneth Lonergan film Manchester by the Sea came out back in 2016. And there was a lot of talk surrounding it about the fact that he can get the highest caliber, you know, theatre actors to come in and read for a line and read for a scene. And it's just the sense that everyone who's performing even the smallest roles, you know, is knocking it out of the park, is bringing their A game. And Anderson is able to kind of harness these performances from everyone in every scene. They just sort of, like we were saying, similarly to both Bradley Cooper and Sean Penn, Tom Waits in particular, you elevate the material that is there.
Yeah, I think a parallel can be drawn with like a Wes Anderson type movie as well, where there's so many like
just assembling this behemoth of a cast.
Yeah, there's so many A-list actors, like especially the French Dispatch. There's so many big actors that are only in it for a very small time.
Well, it sort of takes on a similar shape to this film in the sense that it feels like a bunch of short films stitched together.
Yeah,
I mean, literally, it is more so in that
French
case.
Dispatch kind of feels maybe a bit more like an anthology, Whereas this is, it just kind of feels like, it still feels like a collection of short films, but it definitely forms a coherent whole. But yeah, I think it's a testament to how good of a director Paul Thomas Anderson and how good of a director he is, and how appreciated he is in the industry, that the actors of the caliber of like Sean Penn and Bradley Cooper and those kinds of guys can come in and just give it their all and like do one of the best performances of their career for only like 5 minutes of screen time.
You've got John C. Reilly popping up for a cameo as well.
I was kind of like I had to double take there because I recognized his voice, but I was like, wait,
he's just in the corner of the frame as he's sort of moving.
Yeah, just dressed as Frankenstein, but he's got such a distinctive voice that I clocked it immediately. I was like, oh shit, that's John C. Reilly.
DiCaprio's father as well.
Yeah,
plays the waterbed salesman.
I didn't realize that until I listened to an interview earlier, and he said that he was in it.
It's sort of deepening the mythology of the whole sort of LA Hollywood thing that's going on. I know that he cast a lot of children of famous film directors as well. I know Spielberg's daughter pops up somewhere, and there's a few others where just sort of, it's not stuff that you notice or really impacts your perception of the film on the sort of base level, but it's just these nice ways to kind of broaden it out. And the thing about Anderson is that every opportunity he has, he does something with it, and he's finding ways to sort of deepen it.
Yeah, and I think it helps build the atmosphere of the movie, is just that whole kind of slice of life of these people who, they're not flashy or anything, they just kind of seem like they could exist in the real world. And I think using first-time actors and non-actors, like I heard him say that most of the people in the film who are like extras are just small extra parts and stuff, or
children's friends and that sort of thing.
Family friends and stuff, which I don't know if that was a side effect of the pandemic, but I think it works really well. I think it works much better, these kids,
you have a chemistry that's pre-existing.
Yeah, and it just feels much more authentic than if everybody was like trying to ham it up and stuff. It feels very grounded and real in its own universe.
It comes back to we started off this, you were saying that you find you'll often return to Anderson's films, and the thing about them is you don't know why it is that you love them so much, and these films that they almost ask for deeper inspection, but it's the meticulousness of it and the way that everything, despite the way that this film feels so organic, it's so clearly orchestrated and put in place.
Yeah, and I think that's a testament to his ability as a director, again, is the fact that he can make something that just seems like such a slice of real life.
It's a heightened reality too. Like the idea of a 15-year-old being a waterbed salesman, would this have really happened? Even though it was the 70s, it's like... Yeah,
although he actually said the film's based on his childhood
Gary
friend.
Getzman, isn't
Gary
it?
Getzman.
Tom Hanks'
he said that
producing partner.
Yeah, he actually was a child actor, and then he started a waterbed business, and then he started a pinball palace, and...
I was thinking about this too in the context of, I don't know if you watched a lot of James Bond movies growing up, sort of Roger Moore, Sean Connery type stuff.
Here and there.
When people used to go and see them, particularly in Britain, in the 60s and 70s, there was a sense of adventure because people hadn't been to these places before. And it was this idea that the James Bond movies would go to different, European countries. They would go to Brazil, they would go to America, and they would show you these worlds that people had only seen in photographs and kind of bring you into them in a real way. And it sort of feels like now, in the age when we can access everything and we can travel anywhere, that we're doing the same thing in cinema, but it's more so going back to different periods in time. The film does in a way feel like time travel. It's like you're taking you back, you're immersing you in this place. Perhaps for Anderson himself too, he was born in 1973, years before the start of this film was set. It's a period that he lived through, but it's something that was kind of just out of reach for him. It's
probably quite a nostalgic film for some people. I remember Paul Thomas Anderson was saying that in those days, kids just kind of had to entertain themselves with whatever was lying around. Like, that's probably why, like a guy like Gary would be like, oh, okay,
let's start a waterbed
business, start a pinball business. Whereas nowadays, the way he put it was that there's not as much mystery anymore, which I think is kind of true because, everything's available at our fingertips at all times, and we're constantly distracted with like social media and our phones and things like that. But back in this kind of time period, you just kind of had to make your own fun. And I think that's what this kind of movie does, is these kids are just kind of like, they're just kind of freestyling it and just kind of making their own fun. And I think that, a lot of us could do with kind of trying to go back and harness some of that mystery about life.